everybody. Welcome. We are Julie, Shilpa, and Maggie. We run JSM Collective, and we're just so happy to be here. What an incredible turnout. We're looking forward to a great conversation between Neha and Rebecca in a few minutes. But first of all, Wonderland Books, thank you so much for hosting us. I know I can speak for almost all of us in this room who are from this area when I can say Amy and Gale, we've been waiting for this. Waiting for a local bookshop that will anchor our community. It's been a long time coming. My kids can't wait. Everyone was so excited, so thank you. The three of us started an organization just a couple of years ago to support women as they navigate the balancing act between career and caretaking. While we were trying to understand what women were out there thinking and what they were wanting, we ran across Neha's Instagram. And boy, did we take a deep dive. I mean, all the way back. We know all of it. We felt like someone saw us. And I feel like a lot of you are here for the same reason. You feel seen. You feel like someone else is out there trying to change the conversation. So, working hard to rebrand the choice that puts motherhood and balanced living first, that's a big deal and something that we hadn't seen. So when we were launching our organization, she was kind enough to come down and speak at our event, and we're just so excited that she finished writing this very, very important book. Neha, the books we pre-ordered in May came last night. So I think a lot of you also pre-ordered. We truly believe that it's going to be viewed as required reading for not only women, but men as well. And we're just so looking forward to the countless conversations that are going to be sparked because of your book. Thank you for starting this movement and giving a voice and a name to what so many of us feel and experience. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the amazing Wonderland Books. No mic. I know. Here we go.
I don't know if you want to hold it. It looks impressive. Yeah, this one says it's on.
Oh, that one's working.
Yeah, that one. This says it's on. Yeah.
That's working. This is our second event, so second time we've used these microphones. We just wanted to welcome you all to Wonderland. I am so thrilled to have this event. This is exactly what we wanted to do with this bookstore. Gale and I took a couple of years and finally found the space and the neighborhood, and we are so thrilled to be in this location and drawing in this community. We always said that we didn't just want a bookstore where we're just doing readings, which I do love, but we want to have conversations, and that is why I'm so thrilled to have this going on tonight. So we wanted to thank you all for being here. We're thrilled, and I can't wait to hear what you all have to say. Thanks for coming. Rebecca,
Do you want to join us?
Yes. So, hi, I'm Rebecca Gale. I am a writer who covers childcare, and I work for the Better Life Lab at New America. And in my time working on this very important topic, I came across Neha Ruch's work. And originally, we were at a panel together, and I was so impressed the way she was articulating the space between what care can do and how it's not a burden, but really something that expands you as a person and even as a potential employee or entrepreneur. And that really resonated with me because, like most of you in this room, having kids and having a family has meant that I've made changes in my own life. And at the time, they may seem very drastic, but looking back, in a lot of ways they were expansive. So this is part of the reason why this conversation is so exciting for me. I will let Neha introduce herself briefly, but I want to start with this question that's sort of where the book begins. And the book is excellent for people who have not quite read it. I guess most people have not because I was fortunate to get an advance copy. But the book starts with Neha's own journey about having a baby, having had this very successful career, this idea in her mind of what a career would look like, what working motherhood would look like, and then coming to a point where she said, wait a minute, I might make a change. So my question to you is, looking around this room, we can see how this ended, but I want to talk about where it started. For you, what was that change like? Describe it to us, and when did you get to a point where you felt confident that you were making the right decision, both inside and out?
Well, first of all,
the one working on.
all right.
I think it's working.
Is it working?
Yeah.
All right.
It was.
It's
hard to
just
hear
like
from up
such
here.
an elegant mic that it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's it.
First of all, look around the room because this
is the real collective of ambitious women making room for family. And I think we have been fed these sort of black and white notions of what it all looks like. And the reality is that we're all so much more alike than we are different. And we're ever shifting, and there's such a vast gray area between stay at home and working. And you know, one of the myths of motherhood is that your network dies, and I want you to look around the room and remember that it just can expand in directions that you can't even fathom. And so spaces like this are so important. So thank you for building it. You know, I had my first child, very similar to you, New Year's Day 2016. It was the height of the Lean In movement. It was the height of the girl boss era. I had graduated Stanford Business School a couple of years before. I had on what on paper was my dream job. And then I had my first child. And I just remember, you know, and I'm not gonna make it sound idyllic. It was still 3 o'clock in the morning and I was still covered in milk. I don't know, reproduction issue, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, and then that's I know that's offensive to some people, but you know, the point being that I looked at him and I finally felt like I wasn't climbing anymore. I didn't have to be anything besides exactly who I was. And that was freeing and exciting to me. I felt like I was learning again about how he slept and how his little brain was developing, and I was fascinated. And I wanted more time with him. And I call that out because not everyone needs to have that experience. There's no data to prove that being at home was the right choice for him. In fact, I think he might have thrived more if I had probably left him with, you know, either in a daycare, he'd have been a ton more social. There's data to prove that your child has equally happy outcomes, whether you work out of the home or in the home or exist in between. I made that choice for me. I wanted that time with him, and I wanted to explore what my life would look like if I made room for family. And yet, as confident as I felt intuitively, and I should say I initially downshifted to part-time work, and then eventually I transitioned to a pause because we sort of did a trial run of how it was going to feel, and I think that was important. I immediately got hit in the face with, well, are you giving up? Like, did you take a spot at business school? Why do you even bother? And it didn't make me question my choice because I do think that I felt pretty clear right away. But it did make me look around at all the women I was meeting at the baby classes and in the baby groups and on the playgrounds, and they'd clocked in a decade in their careers. They had equitable relationships with their partners. They weren't serving cocktails at the end of the day, right? They had access to tools and technology, so they were freelancing or consulting or tinkering with an idea, or they were just excited to take a break for a bit and figure out what came next, and none of it matched the outdated stereotype that had fed all of the assumptions about my boredom. And so, you know, like I said, it was 2016. There was a ton of content around the traditional working parent, but there was nothing speaking to ambitious women making room for family life. So it started as a little blog alongside my baby, and it's grown into this over 9 years.
Amazing. And I also want to introduce Amy briefly. For those of you who don't know, Amy was an editor at the Washington Post for many years. She was my editor when I freelanced, and she ran the very successful and much loved and much missed section on parenting at the Washington Post. So anyone here has probably read many of those articles. But Amy also did a pivot very recently, and we were talking briefly beforehand about how some people make these changes, like what Neha's talking about, when their kids are very young, but some people also make these changes when their kids are older, because sometimes older kids have different needs and different family obligations. Can you talk about that? Sorry, talk about that. So, Amy, can you talk a bit about how you got here and what your pivot has been like?
I say it's Gale's fault. So Gale also pivoted. So Gale and I are in book club together, and she was with a company that got bought out, and so she needed to look for a new job. And Gale said to our little book club, I'm gonna keep going down the corporate VP route, but I've always wanted to open a bookstore. And my eyes just lit up. And I'd been at the Washington Post for 28 years. But I was itching, and I knew 50 was on the horizon, and I had these 2 boys at home and a husband with a very demanding job, and I was always dreaming of other things, even though I had a job I absolutely loved for a very long time. And so I was cheering Gale on, and she finally said, do you want to join me in this? Do you want to be my partner? and opening a bookstore. And I said to my husband that night, haha, Gale asked me if I wanted to open a bookstore with him. And he said, and you said yes, right? He said, it had always been a dream of mine as well. And so I called her the next day and I said, don't count me out yet. So I loved my job. I loved the people I worked with. I loved the content. I loved editing people like Rebecca Gale. And it was my identity. I'd been doing it for so long. In the meantime, I had a son at home who's now a senior, graduating, and a now freshman. And I was excited to think about them seeing me build something and do something different and to follow my own dreams. So that's sort of how this all came about. And it was a big pivot, but I hear this all the time. I heard it when I was in that job. I heard it, I wish my sister-in-law were here because she was an executive at PBS and her children, she said to me, she's a little bit ahead of me, my girls are twins. I didn't take a long maternity leave, but I do want to be home now. And they did not understand that. And they said, well, wait, what can we give you? And she said, no, I'm just done. I'm just done for now. And they could not comprehend it. And she, no regrets. She's working here sometimes now. So I love seeing it on both ends. And I think it's just so interesting and important. And I do feel like this is a moment.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That actually brings me to one of my other questions about why this moment now? Because I know these conversations have been had. We're not the first generation of ambitious, smart women to wonder about our choices and how society views them. But why do you think some of what you're saying now with Mother Untitled is hitting in such a big way that maybe previously, when it had been said before, it didn't necessarily resonate in the same way or with as wide of an audience?
There was sort of a crescendo effect that was happening, right, on second wave feminism, where we had fought so much for our capacity in the workforce, and it sort of reached its pinnacle with Lean In and the Girl Boss era. And if you look at the data from Pew back in 2012, I think, it was pretty clear there were two things happening. Yes, there was a lot of emphasis on how we could blaze trails in the workforce, and millennial women were saying we want to identify with motherhood more than any generation prior. We wanted that time, right? So we wanted both. And at some point, that collides. And I was watching that data as I was experiencing it myself. And yet, I remember planting the seeds for this work. And in the beginning, I got a lot of questions around, well, like, that's anti-feminist what you're doing. And I remember looking at them being like, no, the whole idea is that we're actually adding options on the table. We want women to be able to pause without shame and without penalty. We want to show how we're still growing and we're still connected, but we weren't ready yet. And then it was 2020 and work and family collided, and we couldn't hide the reality of family life. And it came into view. And suddenly, remote work started happening. We were like, okay, some of this is hard and some of this is easier. I wonder how we make this work better. And the cost of childcare was suddenly astronomical. And people started re-examining work and family, right? We talked about it as a great resignation. It's also been thought of as a great re-examination. And that moment, I think about this all the time. If I have written the one pager on this book that I sent to my agent in 2018. I didn't give it to her till 2022. I would have never gotten this book deal if I tried it in 2018. And I think the world was ready for more options about how to make work and family work, because for so long it's been written off as a luxury. And then we realized, wait a second, 1 in 3 women can't afford to work because of the cost of childcare. 60% of women are pausing because of financial considerations. So there need to be more options on the table, and I think everyone's looking for more ways.
Amy, you want to talk too about some of the things you've seen in the way, I mean, you've seen the essays, the conversations, decades of this, like how has that changed over the years?
I think there's been a lot of women who've sort of tried to explain why it's okay, and that has turned a lot over the years from sort of trying to prove that it's okay to stating that it's okay. That's been a big change. COVID was pivotal in so many ways because you could see what you could do not going into the office every day and not just, grindstone every day and not leaning in the way that was sort of the traditional way of leaning in. And that was always what was so amazing to me, is watching these women, mothers, talk about, like, balance is not the word. Balance is not the word anymore. And whether it's like going part-time or going, home and being with your family, it changed from trying to say that it was okay to actually believing that it was okay, and here's why. And it is just so many very qualified career women we have many more possibilities now to do both, or to just focus and to know that we're going to be okay when the kids go to school and we're ready to hop back in there. And you can, like, freelance and create yourself, and that has been just, technology has helped that. It's just materially changed across the board.
And yes, it's a great example of sort of the silver linings that have come with some of these other changes throughout COVID and some of the things that came out of it. I also want to talk about some of the how that your book brings up, because I've talked to people coming in here tonight about where they are and their idea about either stepping in or stepping out. And there's a lot of focus in your book about how to get back into the workforce and how to step out and how to do it in a way that works for you and your family while still keeping your career prospects sharp. And you've been going around the country, literally the country, talking to people. And I'm curious for you to share some of the more persistent struggles you've heard from people who are either thinking about taking a downshift or have done it or thinking about coming back in, and what have been some of the more effective ways to overcome some of the more common obstacles that people face.
My world is my oyster. I think universally, there's a sense that things that come up are identity, right? So many of us have been fed this idea that when we're asked what you do, it stands in for who are you. And in the absence of having like a very quick, which is why I asked you about how your identity is feeling these days, right? You get really used to one answer. And so I used to say I run brand at a tech startup. 5 words. I said I run, which is a leadership position, brand, which is somewhat creative, tech startup, like I'm a little bit ahead of the curve on technology, whatever. I was able to convey things I cared about, or at least I thought I cared about, right? And in the absence of that, stay-at-home mom didn't fit for reasons I get into in the book, right? It's laden with tropes. If you poll the American public on what stay-at-home mom is, the American public will still say, in majority, June Cleaver, which is a fiction left over from the 1950s, right? Meanwhile, if you ask them what the working mother is, they will say Michelle Obama. That's like a very large power chasm, fact, fiction, like and so naturally, when women pause, they're really concerned that they're giving up their sense of identity as ambitious, feminist women. And so having to dismantle that and re-architect a sense of, well, maybe, for all the reasons we've just talked about, because technology has evolved, because our partners are more involved, because we have a foundation of more work experience than any generation before us, before having children, this is not the same reality, and we just haven't updated the perception. So identity is one, financial dependence is another. So even if, of course, the second chapter really gets into the realities of budgeting for this, in the case of most families who have to make shifts, but the foundational shift before that is this idea that you are financial independent, right? So many of us have been taught that, just going off on feminism is power, and power is money. And so giving that up in any way feels so scary. And so this shift that we talk a lot about is this idea of having really honest money conversations with your partner ahead of time, so that you know that you put into place the scaffolding, whether that's formal paperwork or whether that's just ongoing money touch bases. But the mindset shift is that we are an interdependent organization. At any given time, you may shift in or out of the workforce, or I may shift in or out of the workforce, but we are making the decision together that one of us is making a shift. We are making the decision together that we're going to value each other's contributions, because I can tell you that when my husband was working around the clock building his tech startup and I was at home, he was able to do that because I was doing the emotional and intellectual labor at home, right? So the household, and just as much as I depended on the household income. So knowing that mindset going in, and by the way, having those conversations reveals if everyone's on board with that. And if they're not, then you bring in outside resources or outside paperwork, or you maybe make a different choice and you stay connected to your income in some way. So those are sort of the universal blocks. And then of course we, once we're into the place of setting up your day to day, that's a exercise about how do we get ourselves unstuck, and that's the exciting work.
Great.
Do you have anything you want to add there?
That was great.
I'm gonna do a bit of a policy wonkish question, but we're in the DC area, so this is appropriate. One thing that you and I have talked about, and I've written a lot about, is that people value what can be measured, and we have no system in place to measure the unpaid labor of caregiving or the emotional labor of running a household. And how do you think this has contributed, this lack of measurement, this basically ephemeral idea of what a person does who's focused on caregiving or household management, to the idea that work for pay deserves support and recognition and unpaid work does not?
I think we're looking at two issues, right? When you look at family life, there's assigning it value, and there's been research, salary.com or Welch's, everyone's done some sort of study to basically quantify it, and they break it down into all of these tasks: chauffeur, chef, household organizer, and then they say, okay, this person, if paid for all these tasks, would get roughly between $184,000 and $200,000 a year, depending on which study you read. That's great. No one's paying us that anytime soon. It's really helpful in having some of those conversations with your partner and just giving yourself that own sense of, wait a second, no one would work 24/7 without breaks. I deserve, I deserve support. The other side of this conversation, though, is we've dumbed it down. We've dumbed it down to these memes around laundry and diapers, when the real labor of parenthood is sitting on the phone with your insurance provider because your child, this was a mom in St. Louis, your child has just been diagnosed with diabetes and you're trying to get her the best care possible, right? The person whose son was just diagnosed with a mental health issue in Detroit, Michigan, and they are trying to understand the systems to get him the supports he needs in the education system. You're adjusting to 2 children and you're trying to do the regulation around making sure you don't lose your absolute shit on their children, right? Like that is like the true awe-inspiring work of parenthood that is often hidden. And I think I always say motherhood gets bad PR, but I think yes, we haven't quantified it and we've dumbed it down. And I think if we start to dignify it, then we assign it a different kind of value, which preserves men and women's prospects, as well as gives us an ability to bring it into the workforce with real pride.
That is actually going to be my next question to you, the brand expert that you are. What is your either 5-word or short line that you sort of described before when you were the I run the brand tech to brand management for tech startup? How would you empower either yourself or women here maybe aren't necessarily working in the same full-time capacity they once were, to describe the work they're doing if they decide to take a power pause?
I give you several ideas in the book, but my favorite is right now, which means this is for right now. I think we've inherited this idea that this is whatever we do, it's fixed and it's finite, and we're shut into this little box forever and ever. The reality is, I talked to a woman this morning in Port Chester, New York, who said she's on to her 3rd pause. She had one, then she went back to the workforce, then she shifted. The reality is she's paused, she's shifted, she's sprinted for periods. I can resonate with that. And so the idea of right now is really powerful. So right now, and then if it is a choice and you are making it, then it is a privilege to get to choose and say, I get to, because you own that power. I get to. Or in the case of people who didn't get to choose, they got laid off, or they, it was a financial decision. I am with my kids. That's what you're doing. That's how you're spending your time. I'm mostly with my kids, and we'll see what comes next. This is an ongoing story. I'm still evolving. This isn't forever. And I'm working on this idea about a bookstore alongside, and I'm working on a project about work and family, and I'm actually tinkering with this interior design project. Whatever the case may be, you get to now construct a fluid relationship between work and family. And I think when we step into a more fluid narrative around work and family, we leave so many more options on the table for everyone, especially ourselves.
That's great.
Amy, do you want to add to something?
Again, you know, how do you do that?
Actually, I will start this question for Amy. I'd love to hear from both of you. Your kids are getting to see you, both of you, do all of this, and your kids have seen you make different decisions over the years. Obviously, yours have had a few more years than Neha's have. I would love for you guys to share some of the either feedback you've gotten from your kids, both the good feedback and the stuff that's made you maybe pause or have to think how you maybe would message something differently to them or approach it differently.
What's been really interesting
World is your oyster.
Okay, thanks. What's been really interesting to me is my kids are much more involved and interested in this than they were when I was an editor at the Washington Post, which at the time felt
So impressive.
yeah, and that was my identity, and I loved being able to say I was an editor at the Post or a writer at the Post, and they didn't give a shit. They did not care, especially because I was writing about parenting. They were just like, just don't write about us. Now it's like every night they want to know everything that happened and like how we decided this and what we did about that. And my 17-year-old is here all the time. There's a gym upstairs that he likes to use, but he does like to just come and hang out, and he asks us questions all the time. And same with Gale's son. Like, it's just been, I think, really interesting for them to see what a person can do. And what I love about that is it's what a person can do. It's not like, oh, my stay-at-home mom who, and I was the flexible one. I was the one doing a lot of the cooking. I was the one doing a lot of the home stuff. They never asked about my job because that's what they saw. But now they just see, like, look, I've built this business. And the downside is I am not home as much. So I've built this business, so instead of a pause, I actually am not home as much. But, you know, I don't know. They just don't seem to mind it as much, other than, you know, they might not have as much food around the house. You know, there's a lot of Uber Eats in the house right now, but that has been interesting to me as well. Is just I'm not around as much. They do recognize that, but they just find it. I find it fulfilling, and I think that shows, and they enjoy that too.
I interviewed a psychologist, Tova Klein, who some of you may know. She has a great book out right now called Raising Resilience. But she mentioned in the interview, it was actually around the topic of bringing on care and bringing on help, because oftentimes we struggle with that, especially if you've paused your work to be at home. There's, you know, one part is financial considerations, very close second is guilt. And in the context of that, she was sharing that your children do not need to always be with you to know that they are loved. In fact, they feel safer if they know there's a web of loving adults around them. And so that was really freeing for me in this idea of bringing in more people to help. And that, you know, I wished I'd gotten to that earlier in my at-home journey, which is why I wanted that as a section in the book. But the other part of Tova's conversation was this idea, when I was asking her a bit about the research about, you know, is there anything you've seen to say that there are different outcomes for children with parents who work out of the home or in the home or in between, whether it's their ambition or whether it's, she was like, absolutely not. They just need a whole and healthy parent. And the best thing you can give that child is that you are fulfilled and you are healthy. And so whatever that means to you and whatever is available to you at that time. So you know, as I've been talking to the kids about it, one of the things that I said to them is, I got to be at home with you for a really long time and I loved it. And I want other mommies to love it as much as I did. And I've gotten to work part-time. I've gotten to work in the playroom, in the closet off the playroom. Now I have a little office by their school. I still try to be home exactly at 4:30 or 5, and then I turn off, and then I turn back on at 8 o'clock after bedtime. I still have 9 and 6-year-old different. And yet I'm traveling, and that is still hard for them. But I also tell them, we get to shift again. I know in March this will feel a little bit different, and let's come back and see how it feels. Right now, I'm so excited about this. I'm so glad Lauren, our amazing babysitter, I'm so glad Daddy and our grandparents are all here, and you are safe, you are loved, and let's plan a family meeting to talk about this. And, you know, on such as we set a date, it was March 1st. And, you know, I say it in the conclusion of the book, but when I think about this work, and if we do this job well, when our daughters grow up and when our sons grow up, if you ask her, did you have a stay-at-home or working mother? She will have absolutely no idea what that means. She will just know I was there, I loved her very much, and I did work I cared about in a way that worked for us.
I love that line from your book so much. I want to do one more how-ish question because we have this great group of people here, and you talk in your book about networking and mom friends, and how making mom friends when you are new to motherhood can be challenging. Making mom friends when you are new to a new situation can be challenging. Some people it is not challenging, but some people it is something that they don't always have the easiest time navigating. Can you give some either advice or perspective or just ideas on how navigating this world with other parents can be an asset and how people can approach it in a way that's comfortable for them?
Hers this time. I think one of the things that holds women back is this myth of what friendship is supposed to look like. It's kind of like everything, right? Our idea and our ideal holds us back from enjoying what we have. Our ideal vision of what motherhood is supposed to look like, and you're like, oh, well, I don't do great meals. I do chicken nuggets, but I'm choosing something. Everything is a choice that we're optimizing for and letting go of the rest. I think in motherhood friendships, we believe that it should look like frolicking in Jamaica with 8 friends and our kids are perfectly getting along on the beach while our husbands have our barbecue. It's just like,
I saw that movie.
Yeah, that was a great movie. It's not real life. Maybe it is for you. It wasn't for us. And I think this myth of the mom squad is real. And all the data shows, another great author who happens to be a friend, Jenny Wallace. Do you know Jenny Wallace?
Yeah.
It's a great book called Never Enough. Please read it. But in that book, she cites a piece of data that the most universal thread between what she calls healthy strivers, which are like raising children who have a good relationship with ambition, is spending 1 hour a week with a mom friend. That's it. But the mom spent 1 hour a week because it normalizes the season you're in. And I think this reality about it doesn't have to be forever. There are friendships that last for a season. It doesn't have to be the everything friend, right? She doesn't have to go out for dinner with you and be your life coach and her husband doesn't have to perfectly I have this great woman I spoke to. Her name was Priscilla de Moisan. She worked in San Francisco and then moved to the suburbs, and she was feeling really lost, and she did 2 things. She's a self-proclaimed introvert. She did 2 things. She found a woman who she calls a super connector, and she said yes to whatever this woman, and the woman invited her to a book club, and she ended up meeting another woman there, and in that space they realized they were both feeling a bit lost, and then they said, well, maybe, it wasn't, she says, this friend wasn't like someone she was gonna go clubbing with, not that any of us are going clubbing.
Some of us might be.
If you do, that's amazing, good for you. But that they would meet for backyard burrito sessions. And every week, that was their standing hour. And they would trade ideas about their work stuff. And the both of them, over the course of 2 years, found clarity in what they wanted to do. She is now actually a tech journalist based in Napa. And, I think friends can be a reason or a season, but I don't think friendship is a luxury in motherhood. We need that hour a week of someone else saying no, my kids are little Looney Tunes too. I'm also my house is a disaster. Just having that is really important. And I think we're so scared. Men go out on the golf course and are seen as doing business. One of the things I did hear from women I interviewed, Zara Hanawalt, who's in Philadelphia, said, I worry about going out for lunch during my day when the kids are in school because I don't want to be seen as a ladies who lunch. But that's not ladies who lunch, that's women sharing ideas and research and resources and bolstering our mental health. And so, I think reframing it as this is a vital part of my health and happiness for this stage of life. I can not be strategic about it, but I can look at it, I can sort of lessen the pressure of what this has to look like and realize that this is more of a need, not a want.
So I'm going to have one more question, but I want to also then open it up to the audience, who I'm sure has additional questions for both. This last question is for both of you, but I'm sure the questions may also be for both of you. I usually end my interviews with somebody by saying, is there anything I didn't ask you they wanted to say? And in this case, what I want to ask you is, you have been talking about this book a lot. Is there anything you don't get to bring up about the book, or a conversation or piece you always want to mention, but not everybody always asks you? What's one thing that you should say about that? And Amy, the same question's for you about owning a bookstore. What is one thing people have not asked you that you want to share about it?
I don't know. I mean,
What do we not know? What's something that no one knows about running a bookstore?
We have no time to read.
It's funny.
Yeah, it is 24/7, and the lights turn off at night, and everything's locked, and Gale and I are ready to go, and I'm like, can I just stay here and read a book quietly? So yeah, it's every minute, every day, 24 hours, except when we're sleeping, but also when we're dreaming, thinking about a business. So hopefully that will change.
But you know what's interesting, because I can relate to this, that your work has become your self-care to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's both a blessing and a burden in some way, because, and I see this for women a lot as we're carving our new paths, that, you know, a work and finding creative or professional pursuit that works alongside family life, the only risk is the thing that starts missing is margin for yourself, right? Because, and I run up against that too.
But it doesn't feel like work. Like I don't come home exhausted, and that I did expect, because it's just so, I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing right now.
I love that. I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing right now.
Yeah, right now.
And women say that after pauses. I wonder if it's any sort of transition then, but I've only researched pauses. But they rank when they return to work, it's 87% rank flexibility. The next is less stress. The next is meaning and impact. And then the next is salary.
This is rank of what they're looking for when they go back to work.
Mm-hmm. And which isn't surprising, because one of the other pieces of data that came out of LinkedIn was how the percentage of women who cite their perspective has, not obviously after parenthood, but specifically after making a career shift for family life, right? It enhances what's important, and it does. It becomes a superpower. You sort of let go of so much to make room for what's important. What do I wish people asked me about? Actually, sort of piggybacking on that, I think this book focuses on so much about what do you have to reconcile in terms of ambition and finances and success, and how can you navigate this stage of life and actually set up authentic goals to actually set yourself up to thrive alongside your kids, and then discover what comes next. The chapter that I could probably write another book about, but God knows we're not talking about another book yet, but chapter 8, which is around exploration and how you can use this stage of life to explore, right? Even if it's Instagram, like you're on there anyways. Can you, when you're scrolling, the content you consume leaves clues for what lights you up. And that self-study will often spark for women. And I think this is why entrepreneurship is so booming right now. It sparks that little seed of, well, what could come next? And then if, you double click on that a little bit, and maybe that thing is books. And then you start consuming more content about what that looks like. And as you have more time available to you, I did actually speak to a woman when I was in Philadelphia who is working 3 hours a week. She has a little baby. She's doing story time at the bookstore, right? Because she's always wanted to own a bookstore. She doesn't have time available to her, but that's the way she's doing it, right? And I bring that up because I don't talk about it a ton on the tour, but you hear me talk about it on Instagram. This idea of the vast gray area between stay-at-home and working mother, meaning that there's so many more of us in between, right? And we don't often talk about the in-between. And I think, whether you're planting seeds for a project and you're in the early stages, or you're ramping it up and it's a very physical thing, we're all on that continuum. And I think we've dumbed down women's projects for so long, right? As like little projects, or that little Instagram thing, or that little blog, or, that's what everyone said about, I went to my Stanford Business School reunion and I overheard people talking about my little blog, and I just wanted to say to them, but it's a game-changing movement. I didn't. But B,
You should.
I know. I'm so glad I didn't, because I just thought I've already parted with my ego when I made the right choice for me and my family. I built that muscle in parenthood. Every time someone judges what you're feeding your kids or how you feed, if you're breastfeeding or nursing or co-sleeping or sleep training, you practice that muscle of letting go of what people think. And I think that we sometimes let our egos hold us back from dabbling in what we might have always wanted to do. And there's no time like right now to take those little seeds and tune in.
Awesome. Thank you. I'd like to open it up to questions for anybody who has one.
Thank you, all of you. My question is, I hear a lot of people say, like, there's no such thing as work-life balance or balancing home and work, but have either of you, writers or thinkers writing a book, thought about what we can replace that phrase with? Because we are still all trying to teeter on the edge of, like, home life and work life, but what's a better phrase for this concept?
I've heard blend and integration a lot more. I think that blend and integration starts to, whether or not that sticks or not, like blend over balance, this idea, it speaks to the same thing, this fluidity between, it starts to get at policy is like, could we move, I don't know why I keep harping on this today, could we move the work day to match to the school day? That would lessen the burden on the child's care. There would be so many reasons that would make sense, right? But that would allow us also to be present for our children at pickup. And there's also this idea of, we talk about remote work, that's walking back right now. I think that was started the first wave towards blend, and it's opened up the doors to, well, what about the huge booming freelance and creator economy, right? Which is done in the fringe hours of family life. And so that's the word that's the sort of concept I'm circling around a lot. And then when you sort of take that into mind, you can start to think, okay, well, what would that look like? What would be ideal for this season of my life? Because maybe it's not a school day pickup for you, but it's more being able to turn off at 5 o'clock. So I talked to a woman in Dallas, Texas, who just didn't take a promotion, and she was reconciling like what that felt like for her. She just didn't want managerial duties because she wanted to turn off at 5 p.m. She just wanted less stress. That was the right version of blend for her. And so it can, that feels a little bit more smudgy and less sort of like this perfect equilibrium that's static.
I think that's a great phrase, because balance it's not real. Your life is changing depending on what is happening at that time. There's never going to be that perfect 50-50 situation, which is exactly what you're talking about. These on-ramps, off-ramps, blending, all of that. It's just, it's impossible to have that perfect balance. You're up, you're down, doing all the various different things, that gray area.
Gray area, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. You talked about kind of exploration and wanting to find, what lights people up, and in this case it was running a bookstore and or like starting this movement. But when we talk to entrepreneurs, sometimes we hear like, oh, well, I'm working all the time, this is exhausting, like how am I gonna manage this? And then it's like, okay, well, do I just push this back and delay it? How is that for you, like navigating that decision and kind of making time for everything? And has it been what you expected in terms of like the time commitment of starting this movement and this business?
I'll go first. I'll be brief and then I'll let you go ahead. But for me, it was, Gale and I talked about this a lot. And we talked about how doing this alone wasn't going to work because Gale has a child at home. She's got 2 girls in college, and we did still want to have life. We both have elderly parents. So my solution for that was having a partner, and we haven't yet taken much time off. We opened a month ago. I think we both have had 1 day off so far.
You just opened.
Yeah, we just opened.
I'm taking tomorrow off.
Yeah, Gale's not traveling. I might take Friday out, but yeah, so we will figure that out. But we kept saying it was important to us that like I wanted to make sure to get to my son's tennis matches. She wants to get to her son's baseball games. I want to go to my trips on soccer games, and we will make that work because we have partnership, and thank goodness for that. But like with anything, but especially when you are doing your own thing, I'm realizing, and we talked about this, you just have to schedule it as if you were scheduling a meeting, making sure you have that time.
I just want to remind you, it took me 9 years, right, to get here. And the reason I call that out is because I had the same, I actually went back because I treated it, even though it was a little passion project, I treated it like a business. And I wrote a business plan, and it has not changed. I have the exact same mission, but I could not, I'll give you an example. I remember talking about this with my dad, and the first iteration of it was I wanted a physical space. I had this vision of a physical space that women could be able to hold their creative and professional pursuit and networking alongside family life, right? Same concept, but it was physical. And my dad said, I love that. How are you going to do that with on a pause? Like, I thought you were. And so, because it is both capital intensive and operationally intensive to have a physical space. So I thought, well, I could do this online. And I started it on Instagram and Squarespace because that's what was available to me at the time. It was something I could do during naps and night times. And I remember looking around and feeling so frustrated because I knew this movement was needed. I knew it was going to be big. And yet I couldn't grow in the reality of my day-to-day life, but I could keep going. And so I have a chapter on goal setting and really redefining success for yourself during year over year. And I remember writing success at that year as like, we weren't going to get bigger, but I could still learn. I could still make a little bit of change, and I could still network. And that was what I did. I used the time available to me to create and build relationships in work and family and the sort of women in New York that were doing that. And both of those things ended up laying the foundation for when I was ready, let's say 6 years into it, right? When my kids aged into school. And I wouldn't say I had this big, I'm gonna decide, but I slowly started phasing up how much time I was investing into it in a time that felt right for us right now. And I don't say this when my publisher's in the room, but I fully intend to at some point, recalibrate on how much time I'm giving, because I do see that my child at 10, when they start coming up on different issues at that transition point. So I'm fully open to sort of the recalibration that comes with it.
Awesome, thank you.
It feels special. Yeah.
So I have 3 kids, 11, 8, and 3. I've been working for 15 years, the entire time they've been alive, and I'm about to take a break from working. I would like to know what your thoughts on or how I message this to my children, because they are older, they've always seen me working, and I have this sense of them thinking, oh, well, dad goes to work, and, he comes home, you don't. So just sort of how do I maintain my own self-respect and dignity in their eyes, I guess, is something that I've thought about.
I think you have to start with your confidence for yourself, right? And really spending time, first of all, with that language around I'm taking a break from work. Well, you're pausing your relationship with your current employer, but you're still working in the home and you're still growing and figuring out what comes next. And that's okay, because I'm still a professional woman who's a mother, has 3 kids, I'm just figuring out what comes next, and that's it. And as long as they see you still investing in yourself and investing in your own growth and talk about those parts of your identity around them, right? That's fun.
Welcome to the bookstore.
It's the club vibes I was earlier. As long as you can show yourself as a whole person that is still growing alongside them, talk about the things that are lighting you up. You might not know them on day one, but maybe in a few months, if and when I'm making this up, but you start volunteering for their schools, or you start getting involved with their with something they're going through and researching that, talk about that, dignify that. And I think it's a really incredible time to actually educate that next generation that this is actually work as well. and that you have an identity that is expansive outside of pig work. And remember that this is only for a chapter. You have no idea where you're gonna be in 6 years, right?
One more question? There was my phone. Grabbed it.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. Quick question, something I've really struggled with. I have 2 kids, I'm in the commercial real estate industry, relatively male dominated field, and something I've always struggled with is this balance of authenticity and strategic in the way that I communicate with my colleagues. And I'll give you sort of an example where it's like, I'm running late to that 9 a.m. meeting because school drop-off was crazy. Or, no, I can't be there for that 2 p.m. tour because I'm nervous I'm not gonna get home in time for X, Y, and Z. And I think like the theme I'm kind of picking up tonight is almost being a little more strategic with your words and kind of like less words in some ways of just like figuring it out, like, or I don't need to explain why I'm not there at 9 a.m. kind of thing. Like it's life, it is what it is, and you can make a judgment about where I am, why I'm there at 9:05 and not 9, Do you have any thoughts around that, around like balancing this is my authentic life, but I'm also trying to put forth that like I'm committed to this job as well, and so there's a little bit of a strategy in how I communicate, but I also don't want to overthink it all the time, because that's exhausting.
Do you have anything you want to add to that? You've covered this for a long time. So I think you were right in saying say less, because I'm sorry, but a man would not say I'm going to be there at 9:05 because and because you're there at 9:05 one day because school drop off was late, that does not mean you're not ambitious. That does not mean you are going to be great for whatever next job comes up. That does not mean that you are less than. So yes, I learned over the years, and men just don't do that. We all sort of do, and I was right there with you, but it's a mindset, and you have to try to change that mindset. Just you're still offering all of you, and just because you are doing things kid related, that doesn't make a difference. Also, men are doing more of that, and fathers are doing more of that, and they don't say, if they're doing the school pickup that day or something, they may or may not say it, but it's becoming so much more level, and so I would just advise you not to feel bad about that, because they are also leaving to go to the school concert. They are also much more than their dads were. So there is the shift is, the gap is closing.
I want to
didn't say that well, but
No, you did. I mean, this generation of dads is spending 3 times the amount of time with their kids than any generation prior, right? So I do think we're coming up on a level, more even playing field. I do still think it's more about you treating those family priorities as a scheduled meeting, right? I have a conflict. That's it. Like, I think this idea of parenting out loud works up until an extent, right? Like, it's definitely great in a particular setting, and you have to gauge that setting. But I also think you are allowed to prioritize it as you do with us, knowing that it is one among other many priorities. And I think dignifying it as a priority and being able to just, if asked, say, managing other priorities at a time.
So I believe now is when we transition over to the next piece where there's going to be, Neha's going to be signing books back here, and you can purchase them from Wonderland Books up here, and there's also some nosh in the back. And I would encourage anybody else who has questions or wants to continue this conversation to please do so, that we are, all assets for one another on this gray area conversation. And I also want to say, the last questioner, you talked about like being your authentic self, like and I know it's very different for everybody in the work that they do, and I understand, the industry is male dominated, but like, you are there as you, and your family life is part of you. And maybe saying there's a conflict is the right way to handle it, but also it is okay to have the full part of you in that job, because your capabilities are not diminished by being a caregiver. In many ways, they are enhanced, because you know how to be responsible, you know how to manage things, you know how to do many things, and you certainly meet your deadlines. I had an editor who used to say he loved working with working moms because they always got things in early. That's right. Because we never knew what was happening later on in the day. But before we transition over, a big thank you again to Amy and to Neha and to Gale from JSM Collective as well for organizing this today, bringing this conversation in, and we really appreciate you guys all being here. So thank you.